So we've just had a couple of important international events in the last week, with President Obama appearing at the UN General Assembly, and then at the Security Council, and then at the G20. What's the meaning of this? And what is the impact?
Well, it's very interesting. Needless to say, we won't know the impact until things play themselves out over the next several months and even the next several years. I regard several things as significant. One is when Obama went to the United Nations General Assembly, he made it a point of trying to separate his administration from past administrations. He did a little bit of that in his inaugural address, but this is really the first time he's gone to a major international forum and done that. I think he's trying to build on the international goodwill that really came with the election, but to show it's more than just empty rhetoric. And I think this was an important step in that regard. Secondly, he chaired a special session of the United Nations Security Council on nonproliferation. An American draft resolution on nonproliferation was adopted. And at the same time, he managed to talk to some very important players in the world, the Russians in particular, to get something resembling a little bit of agreement on how to approach Iran. Now, this may simply be a blip. It'll be difficult to see what's ultimately going to happen as multilateral diplomacy moves forward. Or it may be signaling that the Obama administration is going to begin using the United Nations and other multilateral institutions as a different kind of mechanism for conducting foreign policy. We sometimes forget, but in the early days of the United Nations, the Truman and the Eisenhower administration actually used the United Nations as a major platform for developing foreign policy, for building coalitions. This faded away during the Cold War. We saw a little resurgence during the Gulf War when George Herbert Walker Bush was president and Tom Pickering was at the United Nations, and the coalition was built together at the UN in order to begin the war against Iraq. Needless to say, during the Bush administration, the idea of multilateral diplomacy really waned tremendously. And so I think what Obama's signaling is perhaps we want to move in this direction again. I'm going to say it as president, so he articulates it. I'm going to chair the Security Council. I'm going to use the UN as an opportunity to meet various players and negotiate. Now, ultimately, we're going to have to see what's going to happen. We're going to ultimately have to see where the United States goes from here. One thing I've often thought is that the American model for leadership in multilateral institutions has been incorrect. The United States tends to see itself as the big player, the player with the big stick. And so we see, if I can use this phrase, we see ourselves as the president of these institutions. And so we're going to go out, we're going to talk to them, and then we're going to tell them what to do. Perhaps a better model would be if we saw multilateral institutions more like an international parliament. And I don't want to overstate the case, but a place where you come in as the leader, as the prime minister, you build coalitions, you negotiate, you propose agenda items, but you ultimately try to reach a consensus with a different sort of leadership style than, say, the president or a president of a world body would. Obama's signaling that this might be the direction that he wants to move. Again, the proof is going to be in the pudding, and the proof is going to be in the eating of the pudding as things move forward, but we shall see.
What should we look for to ascertain whether your supposition is real or turns out not to be the case?
Several things. First of all, I think we would see the Security Council as being the place of first recourse for international issues, international crises, where the United States would go there, present facts, present draft resolutions, where we would see Hillary Clinton sitting at the Security Council, where we would see, perhaps even more than just once, Obama sitting at the Security Council. I oftentimes think perhaps the most dramatic session of the Security Council was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the United States presented the evidence against the Soviet missiles being emplaced in Cuba. Now, we might not see something like that. Matter of fact, the last time we saw that was probably when Colin Powell was testifying for the Security Council on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. That didn't go so well. But that kind of use of the council. So I think we'd expect to see that. The other thing we'd expect to see is a greater engagement in other multilateral institutions and other multilateral bodies. Now, we've seen the administration moving toward maybe once again trying to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We've seen the administration pushing again to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty. We've seen some discussions about whether the United States should adhere to the International Criminal Court. These kinds of steps, so something at the Security Council, making the Security Council a major forum for international discussion, coming up with proposals and with draft resolutions, but then engaging more in these other international legal instruments and other international institutions. Those would be the kind of things that one would expect to happen if, in fact, the President and the administration were serious about moving in that direction. Now, we started to see some of that at the beginning of the Clinton administration, and then it very quickly fell apart. So we're right now at a position where I think it's too soon to tell ultimately what's going to be happening in the future, but those are some of the steps that I think we would expect to see.
Looking a little bit forward to another international meeting, what do you expect to come out of Copenhagen, the Copenhagen meeting on climate change?
It's a very good question, and I think that we should have very low expectations of what's going to come out of Copenhagen. The United States has had a very checkered past in dealing with major international negotiations on environmental and climate issues. We seem to be, in many respects, the bad player, the player who doesn't want to go along with things like Kyoto. I'm not convinced that the administration has formulated a clear, coherent policy yet. So I don't think we should see the United States taking the kind of leadership role I would ultimately like them to take, but I actually think that's good. If we don't yet have a clear, coherent policy, the best thing that could happen at Copenhagen is that we go, we listen, and we talk about future steps. We talk about where we go from here. The worst thing that could happen is we have a policy that's put together in a very shoddy fashion and gets shot down, or we appear to be the spoiler, the state that says, no, 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 we can't do this, we can't do this. I would much rather see us listen. I'd much rather see things move forward in some direction where we're looking at a future process than for us to try to get our act together last minute. And I think this is just sort of a natural thing because the administration has been focusing on so many other things. At least my perception as someone who's not in the administration is we really haven't had a chance to develop any kind of coherent policy in that area. I think in other, actually nuclear proliferation, we've had more of a chance to develop something that is more coherent than we have in the area of climate change.
So maybe a new era of multilateralism, and maybe not.
Exactly.
We'll have to see.
We will see.
Thank you, Tony Arend.
Thank you very much.